Hot off the press, this is my review of the December 22 AAA exam. You can tell it's the December exam sitting. I've got a vest, a shirt and a fleece on today to try and keep warm. It's absolutely freezing in the UK. So for those of you who did sit the exam yesterday, you may have been one of those who were affected by the remote exam issues, and lots of my students had issues logging on to the exam system to sit their exam remotely. Now, incredibly frustrating and upsetting if you're not able to sit the exam and you've put in all that work and preparation. Now, if you're somebody who is using this to prepare for perhaps a later exam sitting, here's some advice on how you can avoid remote exam issues. First thing, make sure you do all of those tech checks early. Right? Don't log on 20 minutes before and then start doing your tech checks. Get them all done in the days before the exam so that you're ready. Okay, you can't control whether ACCA let you in or not, but you can control whether you've done all of your checks. Secondly, log on as early as you possibly can into the system. Okay, don't leave it till 2 minutes before the exam is supposed to start. The very earliest you're allowed to log in, get in. And if you are having issues, keep trying. I had several students who couldn't get in for 10 or 15 minutes. Then all of a sudden, it all just worked. So keep trying. And this is outside of your control, right? So don't stress about it. It's not something you can impact, right? This is ACCA's issue, and it's been going on for some time, and I know they're working really hard behind the scenes to try to get rid of these problems they're having. They outsource the provision of the exam software, the remote exam software, and I know they're having all sorts of problems with it. If you are having problems, best thing you can do is contact ACCA and let them know about it. If you try and ring, you won't get through on the day, but you will be able to send them the contact form. But some of my students had to wait like 45 minutes on hold, which is, again, quite a stressful thing to be doing. Send the contact form in. It's on the ACCA's website. Just Google ACCA contact form. And then you will be offered whatever alternatives are available to resit your exam. So this exam paper then, the December 22 exam, for section A of the exam, there were 2 variants of the paper. And what's on those 2 variants is showing on screen now. If you want to read through it in detail, then pause the recording here. Now, my overall review of these 2 variants in section A of the exam paper. They both had business risks on them, which is something the examiner is doing more and more under this new setup with the 20 professional skills marks. And according to my students, there were loads of business risks to go at. In each scenario, there were lots of things that you could pull out that would impact on the company's ability to trade going forward, its ability to meet its strategic goals. Impacts on cash flow, ability for it to do its projects it wants to do in the future. So there are loads of business risks, but both of them, there weren't that many risks of material misstatement to go with. And that is something we're seeing more and more in this kind of modern version of the AAA exam. They're not giving you that many things that might be wrong in the financial statements. So you've really got to run with the ones that are there. And if you can't find that many, well, you've got to be confident enough to just move on. Right? So for an 18-mark question, I'm hoping you're coming up with 5 or 6. But if you can only come up with 3, that's fine. That's all you can pull out. Well, use that precious time on the rest of the exam paper rather than stressing about not having enough ROMs. There was a bit of a twist in one of the variants. We had to calculate materiality based on revenue rather than on profit before tax. So it's showing the examiner wanting you to kind of know the wider syllabus. Right? Most questions, revenue is 5 to 10% of PBT, but it can be 0.5 to 1% of revenue. It can be 1 to 2% of assets, and you kind of need to know your stuff. But if you miss that, it's only going to be 1 mark, so don't stress about it. There were unusual requirements in each of these variants. In the first variant on Fox, responsibilities of the audit committee to the external auditors. Quite an odd fringe topic there, not something the examiner normally does. You can almost say this is a kind of knowledge-based requirement. Very unusual in AAA to get something like that. But if you do get something that's a twist, well, have a go at it. And if you don't really know how to answer it, don't let it stress you. Let it wash over you and go, do you know what? There's so many other marks on this exam paper. I'm still going to be able to pass. The reason it can be a problem is if that throws you off and you focus overly on the one thing you can't do rather than the many things that you can. The twist requirements in the second variant on Magerio, outsourcing credit control and the impact on planning, again, quite an unusual requirement. That's not knowledge-based. That's you having to kind of apply your understanding of an audit to the scenario information. So yeah, and another unusual one. But both of these, I thought, looked like quite fair questions, and that was but certainly the feedback from my students on my course was that they actually, in section A, where they had enough time to do the question fully, they felt like it was all right. But weirdly, in both of these questions, often the final requirement in section A is on ethics, and in both of these, there wasn't really much in the way of ethics. Now, I'm saying this based on what I've been told by my students. Right? That's my big caveat with these review videos. I haven't seen the questions, so this is all second-hand, but channeled through my students on my course, and I've also done a bit of research elsewhere. So I don't think there was any ethics in section A, which is weird. But there was lots of ethics in section B. So moving on to section B. Now, as always in section B, there was one question which would have had some reporting in it, always, and then another question which won't have been a reporting one. Now, the reporting questions, it looked like there were 3 different reporting questions that people got. Now, in this exam, it wasn't like if you got the Fox question in question 1, then you got the same question 2 and question 3 as everyone else. Or you got Magerio in question 1, you got the same question 2 and question 3. That's what happened in September of 22. But in December of 22, that didn't happen. People seem to get a random selection of the reporting and non-reporting questions. So these are the 3 reporting questions that came up, and they were all quite different. The first one was fairly non-technical around quality management. Yeah, how well has the audit been done? Chat to me about a few ethics things, chat to me about professional issues, but quite a lot to go with in the scenario. And then that horrible second requirement that people really don't like, which is critically evaluating an audit report. Now, people don't seem to like them. You have to kind of go in and go, that's what's wrong with the audit report, and here's an explanation of why it's misleading. And people tend to find those difficult, but 10 marks on audit reporting if you knew what you were doing. The second variant, now this one is the one that made people's hair come out a little bit. Pension accounting. I mean, who remembers that? Who revised that in their preparation for AAA? It's kind of showing that anything you were asked about in the SBR exam, in terms of the financial reporting, they can draw on in the AAA exam. Now, the student who is less resilient would see the pensions bit at the start and potentially fall to pieces and not move on to getting the easier marks that came later in this question. The impact on the audit report was fairly straightforward, as I'm told. And the ethics bit that was added into this question, again, 10 marks, relatively straightforward. The student has more resilience, sees the bit that's hard, the pensions bit, and goes, the examiner's up to their tricks. They've dug a little hole for me, which I could fall into, but I'm not going to step around that hole, and I'm going to move on to the easier marks that are elsewhere in that question. And hopefully that was you. The third question, which was on leases and inventory, lots of financial reporting needed here. Okay, so you again showing you needed to draw on your SBR knowledge, and that revising some of your accounting standards is helpful for this exam. Not business critical, it's not the defining feature of whether you pass or not, but it can be helpful if you get a slightly more technical variant. And this one only had 4 marks on impact on the audit opinion. Now, hopefully, again, if you know what you're doing with the impact on the audit opinion, you're going to be able to pick up those marks quite comfortably. You're talking about the type of issue it is. You know, is it a lack of evidence, lack of sufficient appropriate audit evidence, or is it a misstatement? How big is it? Material and pervasive, and therefore, what's the impact on the opinion? Is it unmodified? Is it a qualified except for opinion? Is it mind blank? Is it an adverse opinion, or is it a disclaimer of opinion? Okay, so all of those variants I thought quite different. I would have liked the first one, personally, because I like those critically evaluating an audit report. But I don't think there's any of them that you go, oh, that one was really easy and that one was really hard. ACCA goes through a lot of work to make sure that the questions you get are of equivalent difficulty. Then the third question, the other one, so the one that is not on reporting, and this kind of covers the whole rest of the syllabus. Now, there were 2 question variants that came up, I think. Again, the same caveat. This is what I've been told by my students. There may have been another one that I haven't been told about yet. Now, the first of these variants was on forecasting. And in most forecasting questions, what we see is the first part of it is matters to consider when deciding whether to accept this client. And there were loads of things in the scenario for you to go at as to whether to decide whether or not we should work with this business. So that was a nice part of the question. The second bit of the question was, what procedures should we perform over the CapEx for a forecast? And for a lot of people, they won't have seen a CapEx forecast before. Most of the past exam questions, it's been like a revenue and profitability forecast, not this kind of CapEx, what are we spending on long-term assets type forecast. So the examiner is, by doing that, by putting that twist in, is testing your skills rather than your knowledge. So you had to use the skills you developed on some of those past exam questions on revenue and profit forecasts and apply them to a different situation. It's a higher level skill that they're testing, something this examiner or the AAA exam team love to do. The second requirement or second variant was a cold review. After the audit has been done, after the audit report has been issued, we're now going back and trying to learn lessons for how we could have improved in the future. And there were 2 scenarios or 2 things that were given. First one, quite weird. Firstly, I like it that there's 2 scenarios. Always like that rather than one big one. Because if you don't like one of the scenarios or it throws you, well, you've got another one to go at. Whereas if it's one big scenario, don't like that so much because if you go down the wrong track with it, you don't really get many marks. So you had 2 bites at the cherry here. The first scenario around capitalizing artwork for non-business use. As I understand it, it's like a car leasing company or something, and one of the directors had some nice artwork that it was just at home. It wasn't even anything to do with the business, but it had been capitalized. So there was no business use. Now that would have thrown a lot of people. Because you'd be like, I've never seen this before, don't know how to deal with it. And again, it's this idea of resilience. The first scenario was harder and weird and twist, and then the second scenario about it being a new client and there's not many controls in the business. Apparently, this one was much more straightforward. So this idea of resilience, of if you see something hard, just walk around it, have a go, but don't let it throw you because there'll be easier marks to come later. And the second scenario was apparently much more straightforward. So overall, I mean, there were weird bits in this paper on all different variants, right? There were unusual twists, a little bit more so than the September paper, which was much more straight down the line and standard. But a well-prepared student who has practiced lots of past exam papers and has developed their skills should have found any variant of this exam comfortable. I hope you found this debrief useful. Please consider liking or commenting on it and sharing with anyone else that you think might find it useful. And if you need help with AAA, then you can scan the QR code that's showing on screen now and get in touch with me. Thanks.